So we wanted to give you guys an overview of a vaccine mindset qualitative study that our team has done. Sorry, my window is being a little weird. There we go. So this is a study that we are just wrapping up, and I'm going to give you a very brief overview before we move into some themes. So the background on this is the California Testing Task Force, which is co-led by the California Department of Public Health and Kaiser Permanente, is working to understand how most effectively expand and enhance vaccination efforts across the state. So we went into this study with some assumptions. We feel that people have barriers to vaccination, and those might be availability, fear, misinformation, and then personal experience and beliefs that might lead to certain assumptions or thoughts about the vaccine. That we need the vaccine in a widespread way to return to somewhat normal, and that we have, sorry, I'm just going to go back one time, and that people have kind of a little bit of a fear about that vaccine. So we can go on to the next. We had a few questions that we were looking to answer. We wanted to uncover some insights about post-vaccine behavior and perceptions. What do people think they can do once they have the vaccine? What does the next normal look like for people once people are vaccinated? What does that look like? And how might we understand the mindsets of those folks? Let me go to the next. We wanted to have a broad representative of demographics. So this is just a very brief overview of the group of 20 folks that we had that participated in our study. This was a digital diary study. And they answered 14 questions, either in video or text format over the course of a week. And go to the next. So this is just a dashboard overview of all of our wonderful participants who were so generous with their time and thoughts and really helped us understand where they were coming from the perspective of a vaccine mindset. Let me go to the next one. So we did want to have a broad overview and a broad group of people who had different mindsets. So you'll see here we had a few folks who would say, you know, I'm definitely not going to get the vaccine. A large group in the middle who were, yeah, probably will, maybe will, or definitely will. And then we had a couple of folks that had actually gotten the vaccine. We additionally did some breakouts with these attitudes based on age, political affiliation, and race or ethnicity. So you can kind of see how that breakdown paired out. It was kind of distributed through the age, but political affiliation and ethnicity, you definitely see some clusterings in some of those different buckets. And we can go on to the next one. And one of the things we were really curious about was what were people's behaviors going to be once they had the vaccine, or if their loved one had a vaccine. And folks were really split. So if they or a loved one had the vaccine, you'll see here on the graph on the left that a bunch of people did report that they would continue to mask, they would continue to social distance, they would continue to follow all those procedures. But we had about an equal number of folks who said, if I'm not getting the vaccine so I can't go back to normal, what's the point? I want to be able to be without my mask, not socially distant, etc. And we also asked people what were some factors that most influenced their decision and mindset concerning the vaccine. So protecting their own health and protecting the health of friends and family were the top two. And the middle one, the one that was in third here, was the reliable, unbiased, and accurate information about the vaccine. And you're going to hear a lot more about this later as we move into the archetypes and themes. I'll hand it to Caroline to continue on.
Awesome. Thanks, Shelley. So as we kind of synthesized inputs from all of our participants, we looked at how they were starting to form patterns across common behaviors and viewpoints and mindsets. And we developed these 7 archetypes that really started to help us treat these people more like a group of people instead of 20 individuals, our 7 kind of common mindsets here. And I'll go through these if I can click right. So we have our steadfast opponents, and these folks are against the vaccine. They do not see themselves getting the vaccine in the future. It opposes their religious beliefs and their value and autonomy, and they adhere to kind of the rules of the day with masking and gathering only when absolutely necessary. So they're pretty critical of how the pandemic has been handled by authorities and pretty skeptical of these certain measures being helpful. Next, we have our indifferent dwindlers. And for this group, getting the vaccine is not top of mind. They do not think it's necessary and are, quite frankly, not at a point yet where they can even schedule a shot anyways. So they're not really thinking about it. It's not really impacting their day-to-day behaviors. Convenience is top of mind for them, though. If they were to entertain getting a shot, it would have to be almost like easier to get than not to get. But they're currently planning to just kind of free ride the herd immunity of others. And then next we have our vaccine advocates. This is our group of people that was very pro-vaccine or had already gotten the vaccine. They might have a few questions or a few concerns, but overall they fully trust the shot, they fully trust the development of it, and they want to do their part to help eradicate the virus. Next are our cautious supporters. This group believes that the vaccine is helpful, but they do have a few reservations for themselves or loved ones in getting the shot. They might have a condition they're worried about. They might worry about their adult children getting it if they're a little bit younger. And they're relying heavily on well-communicated and actionable information and are generally very cautious with all of their everyday risk and exposure and behaviors. And then next we have the scared skeptics. And this group is pretty fearful of the side effects and what the short and long-term health implications would look like for their unique health conditions. They have something that is what they feel very unique to them that hasn't been tested or studied with the trials, and they would not consider the vaccine for years until it is shown to be effective and okay for somebody similar to them with a similar background and health condition and kind of that okay thumbs up from their personal physician. Next, we have our reluctant vaxxers. And these folks have reservations about the vaccine, how rushed it seemed to be, what the side effects might be, but ultimately are willing to get the shot after carefully weighing the pros and cons. They might have a stronger tipping point than others with wanting to do certain things that would put them at risk levels that they cannot control, like traveling by airplane or wanting to attend their kids' soccer season across various states and counties. So they're very much weighing the risks and rewards of the vaccine and ultimately wanting to make a very informed decision. Next, we have the healthy independents. This group believes that the vaccine is fine for others who are vulnerable health conditions, older, but they're pretty trusting in their good health and immune systems above the vaccine. It's simply not made for them. They don't need it. If they got COVID, they could fight it just fine. They don't want this choice made for them. But ultimately, if the vaccine was necessary to carry on the lifestyle that they want to live, they might be tempted to get the shot. They do follow the rules of masking, but kind of reluctantly so. So, if it's kind of this ticket to normal, they might reconsider their current no status. And finally, that's all 7. We tried a couple of different 2x2s to see how they mapped against one another. And as you can see, it's kind of this spectrum from being very pro-vaccine, having high confidence in what the shot will do for you, to kind of this like, nope, I'm not getting it, super low confidence in how it was made, what it'll do for my body, etc. So in our discussion today, we'll kind of be focusing on these folks in the middle who might be movable up to this right-hand corner. And with that, I will hand it to David McCuskey to take us through some of our initial themes.
Yeah, thank you, Caroline. So over the course of the study, we synthesized 11 themes, which we're currently in the workshopping and finalizing phase as we move into sort of the strategy and design development stage of the project. We developed these from the details that our respondents shared about their COVID-19 vaccination beliefs, excitements, information sources, discourses, behaviors, all of that. And so these themes really emphasize the importance of social networks, of worldviews, of value systems, of information sources in informing vaccination opinions, as well as the ways in which participants rationalize those perspectives. They cite the abundance of vaccination concerns that people have, their emphasis on individualized and unique needs, the importance of autonomy in the decision-making process, and their hopes and expectations for a future post-vaccination world. There's a lot of content here, so we'll try and give you kind of a high-level overview. But these themes really kind of play a key role in understanding that there's no one-size-fits-all when it comes to addressing vaccination perspectives. So the first theme here is around social networks. No matter who we are, what knowledge of COVID-19 that we have, there's very little doubt that our social networks are influencing our perceptions of the pandemic. So participants really leaned on citing their social networks as sources of anecdotes, evidence, opinions that have been shaping their COVID-19 vaccination perspectives. At the same time, they also noted that having discussions around COVID-19 when their opinions do differ with these sources was something that they didn't like to do or that they weren't willing to do. They weren't into the business of changing others' minds. So there's a very deep sort of social element to COVID and a stigma associated with discussing COVID. There are different narratives that emerge that we push onto others and their COVID-19 vaccination beliefs. And all of this seems to be informing our own risk models, our own prevention behaviors, and our perspectives around the vaccine. So let's jump into the next one here. This theme really centers around the cost-benefit analysis that happens when it comes to the vaccination decision. So people are weighing the risks of an adverse reaction in the short term, the risks of side effects in the long term, and the guarantee of protection that the vaccine may immediately provide them. They're also thinking about the strains and how those might impact their protection. But all of this is just muddling the decision-making process in many ways. So for those who we might call the movable middle, there are tipping points that are relatively unique to each person. It wasn't just about which priorities rise to the top, but how close people feel to the risks and rewards that they're considering. So you might be risk averse to COVID-19, but worried about the long-term side effects of the vaccine. You may have a child returning to school or sports and you want them to participate in that. So that might be your tipping point. You want to take that vaccine to make sure that you and them are safe. You might have individual concerns that you need to be addressed by a provider that are very unique to your own health behaviors. And so everyone's tipping point is just a little bit different. And by digging in, we can really understand what those are. So when it comes to weighing risks, people are constantly weighing this risk of contracting COVID against their current behaviors and potentially what the vaccine could or could not bring for them. So some think that getting COVID is less risky than what has been happening to their mental health because of the pandemic. So they prioritize solutions that might not be COVID safe, but bring them peace of mind in other areas of their life. Others may see COVID risk as less acute because they feel that their body and their immune system is really, really strong. Or maybe they think that the risk of COVID is less acute than the economic ramifications of social distancing and masking. But no matter what the factor is, people are asking themselves, is getting COVID really as bad as X, Y, or Z when it comes to rationalizing their vaccination perspective? Next is the laundry list of issues to overcome surrounding the vaccine. So these were the concerns that people shared, which I'm sure that many of you are familiar with. Some of these are really focused around the personal and individualized effects of the vaccine, so long-term side effects, that the science is uncertain, brand new, and therefore they don't trust it quite as much. Or maybe there's a vaccine ingredient that they take issue with, or that they think is controversial or morally not in their belief system. And then there's other folks who are focused on sort of large-scale policy and political issues around the vaccine. So they point to the rollout, the phasing approach, the political motives for vaccine development, the clinical trial process. And for those who are really worried about the vaccine in the first place, they point to these larger institutional processes that are shaping their own vaccine narrative in their head and justifying their opposition. So this kind of begs the question of where and how people get information about the vaccine. Our participants really cited all different sources of information. They talked about the CDC and the White House. They talked about mainstream media organizations on both sides of the political spectrum, and even to less common sources of evidence sometimes that were described as like alternative medical journals or just websites that they frequented. But across the board, participants felt really strongly that this barrage of information was just too much, and that it's a really, really high information burden in thinking through and taking the attention and time to sift through all that information and formulate your own perspective. They're really sick of hearing from celebrities and politicians, and they're looking for a single sort of fresh perspective that brings something new to the table, that feels balanced, and that they trust the source of. They really are over this back and forth information mix, and they want authorities to take accountability for all of it. They want to to admit what they don't know, what they do know, and where we're going with things. But really, they're just looking for a new perspective and a single source that communicates that to them. And now I will turn it back over to Caroline to introduce the remainder of the themes.
Yeah, thanks, David. So I think we're on number 6 now, is all about how during the past year, control and freedom have been seemingly lost. And as a result, many folks are looking for independence and choice and a return to their kind of normal daily lives. And they've placed great value in self-advocacy and autonomy and decision-making and desire a judgment-free reaction to their vaccination decision, whatever it may be. They want to be treated like an individual, not a big populace, not the herd, right? So the pressure of choice for many is kind of leading to their safe spaces. They default to what they know. And so that, if they typically get a flu vaccine, that might lead them in the direction to vaccinate against COVID. If they typically avoid the doctor and all shots altogether, that might also lead them in a different direction. So it's really, kind of when we're bombarded by choice, you kind of go to your known behaviors and the frameworks and what you feel is socially acceptable amongst your friend group. And our next theme is all about perceiving persuasion and fostering conversation. Our participants were steadfast in saying that they would not try to impart their vaccine decision upon anyone else, nor would they be swayed to change their own decision by others. But they're incredibly fearful of making the wrong choice if they happen to be on the fence. And many said that they would look to their care teams or primary care physicians to help guide them to a smart choice. But they don't want to just be kind of told, you should do this or maybe you should wait, but they want a two-way conversation so they can feel heard and ask questions. So much of the, mainstream media and advice is just one way right now. So opening that up to two ways is vital. And many desire to see proof in the data and in the numbers and other information points that would help them feel more at ease with their decision. And ultimately, despite saying that they weren't looking to be influenced by anyone to make a decision, our study participants did mention that there were several sources of influence and guidance that would help them along. And next, it's human nature to look for truth and comfort in the things that we know, specifically the people that we know and the experiences that we've had and what we believe to be real and true in the world. So when it comes to navigating whether or not to vaccinate, this sentiment gets put into action. People compare it to things like the flu, especially since that was talked about kind of from the beginning. They listen for other stories of COVID or the vaccine from their friends or family. If they had a loved one who got it and it wasn't that bad and they got over it in 48 hours, they might not be that fearful and thus might not be that eager to vaccinate. They might also look to other destructive epidemics like polio or something that has kind of taken decades and, to overcome and still might not be fully contained across the world. So, they kind of look at why are we rushing to this vaccine when this could take, a lifetime to overcome. It seems like we have more time to really be smart about this. So, many participants also mentioned the lack of anything to compare this to, and that causes some strife. And, they rely on their moral compass, their value system, and their intuition to kind of guide them in the right direction at that point. And next is, what is this next normal? We asked folks, what does the world look like in a year, and 5 years, and 50 years? And, asking what does the future look like, our participants responded with this overarching vision for a resurgence of normal, but a new version of it. And they acknowledge that businesses will change, our behaviors will change, and noted that this virus will always be amongst us. And they actually compared it quite a few times to the new rules and regulations that came after 9/11. Whole infrastructures and departments were stood up to help us travel safely. So, new things came about and new ways of having to prepare yourself to get on an airplane. So it might be similar to that, but expand further than just an airport. There was also this acknowledgement of the tension that might exist between those who vaccinate and those who wait or choose not to. So what does that start to look like as we kind of parse ourselves out in the new world? And finally, we have the politics of the moment. So as you could imagine, this topic is really charged with people's perspectives on how politics were at play. And the politics surrounding the pandemic were incredibly top of mind for our study participants. And they're frustrated with how information, rules, regulations rolled out because of the blame game that seemed to be happening from the top down. And, you know, they're kind of wanting action. They're wanting a unified front. They're wanting kind of everyone to be on the same page, to be doing the same things. And it just seems tricky when the president is saying something, your governor's doing something else, this county's doing something else, medical experts are saying this, et cetera. And so, you know, this real desire for the unified front to overcome the virus, but still allow people to have choice with their bodies and not mandate the vaccine was important. And we also recognize that there isn't a ton of knowledge on what actually public health is and what it means and how we should think about that differently than our private health with our private physician, you know, and just kind of acknowledging this larger kind of desire to separate the politics altogether from the medicine as we move forward in this space. Oh, one more. Abundance of hope and optimism. So I think this was a nice kind of bright light at the end of the tunnel that we saw across all of our participants, is that even though this is a state of fear and worry and stress with COVID-19 and the vaccine decision, most all of them were very optimistic about a brighter future. So overcoming the virus, not taking things for granted, learning from this experience and getting help to those who currently can't vaccinate were the sentiments that were shared about the days ahead. So I think it's just super critical to learn from this experience and to be better prepared for future pandemics as we march forward into the future. So I think that captures our themes, and I know it was super quick, and our kind of group discussion will take place, and we'll mostly be looking at the archetypes and how we might design new approaches for vaccination, messaging, policies, access, service delivery, et cetera. But we'll have a brief overview of the themes as well when we go into our groups. Whew, all right, so we're on time, Shelley. That feels great.
Great. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it and appreciate the on-timeness of it all. So we are going to move into our Q&A session. So MJ, I know a couple of questions came through in the chat and we can maybe start with those.
Yes, we have a few. The first question is from Honor Sin, and she asked how the archetypes feel about each other. And for example, would the folks kind of resistant to vaccination be turned off by pro-vaccination people trying to persuade them?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think when we asked people if they would try to impart their vaccine decision on somebody else, you know, if your neighbor or mother is a anti-vax mindset, would you try to convince them otherwise? And most folks were like, no, you know, I get it. And people will do what they believe in and what they feel is right. And that's okay. I'm going to do what's best for me, and others should do what's best for them. I think certainly people who are on the pro-vaccine side might wish that more folks would feel that way. But that's the same for those that might be on the no vaccine side that think it might be morally improper or something that's stripping away choice or giving too much power to the government. So yeah, I would say they're not trying to change one another's mind, but they are trying to just kind of happily coexist and want to beat this thing one way or another.
Great, thanks, Caroline. Another question, and Jose, you might need to contextualize this a little bit because I missed which theme this question was directed towards, but he asked, is if it's a way folks contextualize against something they feel they know. Did anyone discuss this deeply?
Was this related to influenza, the comparison?
Yeah, it was MJ. It was that comment that you made about the interesting connection between COVID-19 and the flu. Like, I'm wondering if people are just trying to find something to attach the meaning to that they feel that they know or can control or overcome. Did that come out in any of the conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and feel free to jump in, DMAC, as well, but I think because when the virus was first talked about in mainstream media, there were comparisons to the flu and the SARS virus and different variations of it. And so people feeling more comfortable with the flu kind of latch onto that, like, oh, it maybe if I got COVID, it wouldn't be that bad. It'd be like the flu. Or the flu shot, they have to kind of reconfigure every single year. Is this going to be like that? And so they definitely were looking to that as a proxy.
Yeah, I would say it is just a familiar risk model for people to turn back to. I think when it comes to the flu shot itself, people were talking about their adverse reactions that they had to the flu shot and how they didn't want that same thing to happen during COVID. But kind of like Caroline mentioned, it's also sometimes a means of downplaying the risk of COVID and being like, well, if I got this, I've gotten really bad flus before. So like, I don't need to worry about this. Or like, if you are someone who like the flu impacts, like you should be making your own decision to vaccinate. Like that's not my job. And there's sort of a individualistic comparison that happens there.
Any other questions or thoughts on the flu COVID comparison? Ollie had a question. It might be hard to answer. He asked how these themes play out on a global level. I imagine that he means worldwide. That might be difficult since these are all US residents. But I guess there are some that are maybe clearly US based, like politics. Are there any of these that seem like they might be more universal?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And we even had one of our participants say, like, this is great you're doing this study with us, but what about an international response? And so I thought that was quite clever that even the participants are looking for that themselves. But I think some of the things that might be more attitudinal when, thinking about this, this hope and optimism for the future and thinking about what the next normal is and how it's this human nature to compare what and who we know this virus to. I think those are all things that kind of transcend, culture or community. And they're just kind of those, human traits that we are looking for information and we worry about, some of the issues that we hear about in the news. And we're trying to compare this thing to something that feels known and safe and kind of understandable. So I think, those aspects of it, certainly many of these themes could transcend location. And some of them might be very US based just because of how it seems our government has muddied the ability to think about it clearly.
If there's anybody on the call who has access to a global roster of participants, Caroline, would you be willing to share the study design with them?
Yeah, we're in the stages of writing our final report now, so it's all going to be captured in one succinct place soon.
Question from Eric, our friend from Public Democracy. Do you have any further insight into the religious impact on vaccinating and what the religious group was or the authority person cited? Or is it more just personal beliefs?
Yeah, so I would say our two participants, Kevin and Kathy here, who are in our steadfast opponents archetype, directly cited the ingredients of the vaccine, stem cells or fetal material being used, and how that was very against their religion and their beliefs. And they didn't cite which religious following they were part of, but they were churchgoers and really, strong sense of faith, and believed that, this was not something for them, that the ingredients of these vaccines should be made more public, and it was just not something they were going to consider for themselves at all. But they were also kind of in families that, despite having the same religious practice or belief system, they did have family members vaccinating. So I think it's interesting that still within a family unit, for example, Kevin's wife got the vaccine and Kathy's mother-in-law got the vaccine. So, I think it just shows that some hold on to some things more than others, perhaps. But yeah, theirs was very much the ingredients issue of their belief system being opposed.
That's all the questions we have in the chat, so maybe folks can raise their hand or.
I think
Yeah,
we
it
have
looks like
one more pop up in the chat from Talia. So she was asking, have we looked at how these findings might be similar or different from vaccine acceptance, hesitancy for other vaccines or diseases? And she says, especially thinking about MMR, which is getting a lot of press around vaccine refusal.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and uncovering a little bit more of that would be pretty incredible to see. We did ask a question, where does this vaccine fall in line with things like the chickenpox vaccine, the flu shot vaccine, MMR, tetanus, polio? And people's general reaction was, well, it can't fall on that spectrum yet because it's too new. We don't know where it falls in comparison to the flu vaccine or the MMR or the chickenpox, because we don't have enough data. We don't have it in people for long enough to really get a good sense of it. And I think in general, people who are pro-vaccine were getting it, and people who were grew up in homes that were a little anti-vaccine or were not wanting to feel like they had a choice made for them were leaning towards not. But I think it also depended on how close people were to an experience with COVID. For some folks, if they had it and they got over it, a vaccine might not be that pressing for them because there's that sense of, well, I've had it, I've gotten over it, I'm perhaps, protected with antibodies now. Also, it could be the flip side of that, where I had COVID or somebody close to me did, and they got really ill and they were, near death, or they did die. That might drive me to get a shot in the arm ASAP. So, I think there's a lot of nuance in that, and finding out more would be incredibly interesting.
And Caroline, I seem to remember too that people voiced their experience with the flu vaccine, and that in some ways formed an impression about COVID vaccines.
Yeah, absolutely. If they had gotten a flu, if they're, getting the flu vaccine every year and they have no reaction besides perhaps a sore arm, they feel pretty good about it. If they've ever had a shot where they have a severe reaction, or it hurts, or it causes illness, or even if a parent had a bad reaction, they're quite a bit more leery and scared, just because, this unknown world of side effects, long and short term, is really something that's top of mind for folks that are hesitant.
David McCuskey and Caroline, I know you did a bunch of secondary research on messaging for other vaccines. Are there anything of the traditional vaccine messaging that works or doesn't work well for COVID-19?
I think with this, and DMAC, I'll let you speak to it a little more, but with this, it seems people are really looking to be spoken to or messaged to as an individual. I think current media right now is getting caught up in this, everyone go do it, we need the herd, it's a population issue, and there's that lost uniqueness. People are feeling, they're not being seen as their unique individual human self, that they're being seen as this large herd that needs to be poked in the arm. So that's one aspect of it. Any more, DMAC?
Yeah, I think now more than ever with this vaccine, there's so much like media buzz around it that a lot of people who are on the fence are feeling like the messaging is condescending or paternalistic in some way, shape, or form. And so a lot of people really emphasized that one-on-one provider discussion. It's like, hey, I have unique concerns. I am a unique individual who has their own health profile, and I would like to speak one-on-one with a doctor who doesn't dismiss my problems, but who addresses them head on, hears them for what they are, and then gives me actual responses to that. I think a lot of people were feeling like the FAQs or the messaging that was too all-encompassing was not really feeling like a two-way conversation. So I know in traditional sort of anti-vax literature, that one-on-one provider discussion is really big.
And I think
Okay,
we have one
Shelley?
person with their hand raised. Do we want to, is that, if it's a quick question, we can take it, or we can take it into the breakout sessions?
Just a very quick question, and it might be fine offline, but I was just curious what the Christian news source, did you all get specific sources? Because I saw you had Epic Times. So it would be interesting to see what their actual sources of news were on the steadfast opponents.
Yeah, we got a big list of them, and I don't recall them off the top of my head, but they were pretty, yeah, there's quite a few of them that in particular our gentleman Kevin cited as looking to daily or every other day for updates and news.
If that's able to be shared, that could be very interesting. We've done a lot of work in that space.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I'll grab it and paste that in the chat.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for the great discussion, and thanks to Caroline and David for the presentation.